Hello, friends. I hear that you want to be successful on the Content Application FRQ, which is the first FRQ on the AP Government and Politics exam. On exam day, it will take you 20 minutes to complete it. I can help you in less than that. So let's just jump right in, shall we? All right, so our first stop on our tour of the Concept Application FRQ is a general overview of how it's structured. Here you'll see that there are 3 points. Those 3 points have discrete task verbs that are associated with them, and you're going to be doing something with those task verbs. So it's important for us to note because it's not here. There will always be a stimulus. It's short, it's about 75 to 200 words. It's giving you a scenario, everything you need to know in order to be successful on that scenario will be presented. You probably will not be familiar with it. In fact, you may have never even heard what they're talking about. That is not a source of anxiety for us because we know that you are going to be successful in pulling out information from that scenario and applying course concepts to it. You're kind of thinking about what might happen as a reaction, even though you're not familiar with the stimulus that's presented. And that is what we're there to assess, not your historical knowledge, but that you can apply content from the course. So here you see we have 3 points. The first one could be identify or describe some kind of actor or action that you see in the stimulus. B is going to get into identifying and explaining how some interaction would carry out between a new actor and the actor in the stimulus. And C is going to give you some new information and ask you to forecast what might happen. Let's take a little bit of a closer look. So in our A point, we see here that we're going to be classifying and describing a scenario. So again, we're looking for characteristics and traits. We're looking to clarify terms and concepts that you might see embedded inside that stimulus somewhere, and then maybe even pulling out processes and behaviors that we're going to be developing later. You're going to aim to complete this in 2 to 3 sentences that are complete sentences in a labeled subsection that is labeled A, providing information from the stimulus when it is requested. Certainly, there might be times where you're like, gosh, I wish I could get more assistance on this. There are several videos on the AP Classroom platform that help you get into more of a deeper dive into these different skills and are going to present you new FRQs that you can practice right along at home. So you can see them there. It is in 1.1, 2.9, 2.11, so on and so forth. Remember, they're always the last video in the video session. Just remember to ask your teacher to make them available. All right, our next stop is on the B point, which is to explain. Again, we're going to be taking course content and we're going to be applying it to that stimulus in a new and exciting way. So make sure that you're referring back to the course concept in A and you're explaining either the significance of a process or how an action can affect something else. Again, tips. 2 to 3 fully developed sentences with an assertion, evidence, and then commentary that connects it back. That evidence should be pulled most of the time, but I mean, I always tell my kids, even if it doesn't say in the context of the stimulus or in the context of the prompt or in the context of the scenario, you really should still be pulling information from that stimulus into your explain as your evidence, making sure that you're using the same actors and action verbs that are up there to show that you understand what's happening. And again, maybe you're like, I wish I had more time to get into the weeds on this. Go to AP Classroom, ask your teacher to make these videos available. The final videos listed there, and each of those topics are going to go into a deeper explanation and give you some brand new FRQs for you to practice and give you some plausible answers. All right, let's take a look at our C point. And our C point, again, new, slightly different variation, some new outside information. Usually it's hypothetical, and what's going to be asked for you to do is for you to apply that information. Again, it's an explain task verb, so we know when explain task verbs, we always want to repeat the prompt, give evidence, again, evidence coming from our scenario, and then you want to, or stimulus, and then you want to close that loop, show how that would show your understanding of course content. And again, if you are like, gosh, I wish I had more time to practice this, look, there's a whole host of videos. There on AP Classroom, the final video in each one of those segments will give you an opportunity to practice on a new FRQ. All right, so we did it. Let's take a look at a prompt together. This is our prompt. You'll see that you have a passage, again, 75 to 200 words. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't, doesn't matter. Shouldn't worry you a bit because there is enough information for you to pull out of this stimulus um, content that you can apply, right? So you're going to be pulling out information and then applying content as asked. So you want to make sure that you spend some time reading that stimulus. Maybe, you read it once. You're going to sit down and read the prompt and then go back and read it again, underlining, highlighting key parts that you think are significant to help you be successful. Here we don't have a rubric, but we do have scoring guidelines. We know that they will always be worth 3 points, and you probably will be asked to describe, explain, explain. If you see different task verbs there, then just follow your training that you're given on the AP Classroom videos that tell you how to tackle those. Remember, when we're identifying, we are naming. When we are defining, we are giving characteristics. When we are explaining, we're showing how or why something interacts the way that it does. And then finally, sometimes we're asked to compare in this course, and that means that not only do you need to give an explanation with some evidence, but you also need to show how they are alike or different. These are all of our reasoning skills that are really threaded throughout the entire course. So task verbs always become really important in directing your attention and energies and focusing your actions so that they are responding to those task verbs appropriately. As always, we want to write and complete sentences. We want to label our parts. There's an A point, a B point, a C point. It's not a flowing essay. You do want to skip a space in between each of those labeled sections so that you are moving right along, kind of keeping yourself on task, making sure you're answering the question and not getting off in the weeds. And actually, that becomes the hardest part of this question is answering the question. In order to answer that question, I would recommend that you really sit down and think about what content do I see here embedded in that prompt? Are there behaviors, processes, or concepts that I need to connect back to? And if I have those, do I have vocabulary words that I need to bring in here, either by naming them or describing them that are going to help me earn my point? Be as precise as you can, making sure that you're using proper nouns and action tense, active tense in your verbiage so that you're showing who did what. Our proper nouns are going to help, especially if we are looking at something. Oftentimes, like the best example I can give is if we're talking about something that is part and parcel to the Senate, maybe having to do with confirmation powers of appointees, legislature isn't going to cut it. You really cannot leave it to the reader at that point to discern that you know the difference between the House and the Senate and the powers that are granted to them in the Constitution. So make sure that you're using the most accurate, proper noun that you possibly can so that you are having a complete thought that doesn't leave it to the reader to infer a single thing about what you do or do not know. Because if the reader has to infer what you mean, then the point is lost. The heavy lifting is on you. Again, I also like to tell my students to use active voice. Active voice is very helpful at making sure that there's crisp, clear action and that you are clearly communicating the different types of powers and responsibilities and duties that are given to maybe the policy making branches of the government or actions that might be taken by parties. If you are unclear about that, again, it leaves the reader to draw some conclusions or to infer what you mean, and generally that is where points are lost. The final thing, specific evidence. Pull it back down from the actual text of the prompt. You want to make sure that it is present and accounted for, and that you are showing understanding of content as you flow through your answer. All right, so let's actually go back to that prompt. We want to go ahead and pause the video right now here and answer that question. I will go ahead and take myself off the screen so that you can have a good opportunity to dive into that question. All right, friends, so you've had an opportunity to answer that question. Let's look at a plausible answer and break it down so we can see why this is a successful response. First, we're going to go to the A point. We know that is a single point. Again, we're describing a power granted to Congress that is outlined in the scenario, this scenario coming from an opinion in US v. Nixon. Here, we're looking and seeing anytime I have yellow text that's been highlighted in yellow, that's my attempt to be really deliberate in pulling down information from that prompt, from the stimulus. I want you to see how I'm weaving it into my answer so that I'm showing that I really understand what's going on here. So it's really important that, yes, I'm referring back to Congress, but specifically Congress in the context of the scenario. And here we're talking about actions taken by President Nixon. Now, I don't really have a firm grasp on what those actions were, but that's not really relevant, right? I can answer this question without having to get into the history of what is happening because it's not a history test. It's looking to see, can you show how these different branches interact? So I just say, look, specifically President Nixon did some things, some actions that are outside of the context of the stimulus. I may or may not know what they are, but it isn't relevant. So we know that they can deliver subpoenas. That's me bringing in outside content that I know, asking for testimony before a congressional committee. I'm pulling that in from my granular knowledge of the course, or requesting information and making sure that there is public interest. That's something that, again, is coming back from our scenario. Our B point, we have to now show, okay, so Congress does one thing. What can the president do to limit its effect, right? So we're not focusing on what Congress did anymore. We've pushed that one aside. Now we are zeroing in on what can the president do, specifically President Nixon in this scenario? Again, do I need to know what happens? No, I'm hypothesizing. So congressional oversight can be affected, repeating that prompt, making sure I'm saying what it is, and I'm getting to my answer is, does he decide to comply? Right? I'm going to go back to my scenario and say, yep, the court interpreted the Constitution. They really didn't decide on behalf of Nixon in this situation, saying it would really have to be, well, I mean, in this situation, that's my outside information sneaking in, right? What they said here is that Nixon, if there is public interest that outweighs national security, that executive privilege power, that informal power is eroded in the face of public interest, especially if there is no national security at stake. And so that's where we're getting at here is, again, if I didn't know, I could just say, look, Nixon could enforce a decision, right? If he looks around and he says, I don't have enough there's not enough public interest, or I'm sorry, public interest outweighs national security, yeah, I should comply. But if they feel as though, hey, it is in the national security interest to keep this out of Congress's hands, then yes, they can refuse. All right. So I'm going to come back around for commentary showing that I understand that this decision tree that the president has in front of them is hinging upon public interest and national security, and it's going to affect congressional power because Congress may have to react by doing something further if they really disagree, right? This is that tussle over separation of powers and checks and balances. And then we come to our C point. Our C point, we get just a little bit more information to help us understand kind of something different. So we have a hypothetical president refuses to submit to a Senate committee evidence uncovered that shows corrupt practices of other senators who are accepting funding from North Korea. Here, I need to make sure that I'm solidly connecting back to my understanding of what's going on in the scenario and content. And so that is where I'm saying, okay, I think here again, it's asking me, what would the Supreme Court do? Hypothesize how the Supreme Court would rule. So I have to come right out of the gate and say, I think the Supreme Court would rule on behalf of the president. And now I need to explain why. So I'm going back to my scenario and saying, hey, they said if there is national security interest, the president can say no. That is when the president's power is at its strongest. I'm going to bring in outside information. Courts like to apply stare decisis. They're going to apply precedent. And therefore, this is where they might say, it goes to the president, and Congress may have some things that they can do, but it doesn't, there's nothing that the courts are going to do to side with Congress in this scenario. Okay, so look, I told you we'd be done in less than 20 minutes, and indeed we are. At this point, we've put a cap on it. We've looked at our concept application FRQ. I've left you a little crumb trail of places that you can go to get additional assistance on AP Classroom. You have a great overview of how this basically functions, and we did it all in less time than it would take you to actually sit down and answer the content application FRQ on the AP exam. I wish you the very best of luck. Stick around. There's more videos that are here to help you be successful on the other FRQs. Until then, bye, friends.